This keto diet, you did a study on the ketogenic diet.
hmm
Got the study here, the ketogenic diet for refractory mental illness, a retrospective analysis of 31 inpatients. What is the ketogenic diet for someone that might not know?
So, a lot of people think or they've heard about a ketogenic diet as a weight loss diet. They think of it, maybe it's a fad weight loss diet. They think of it as a very, very low carbohydrate diet. They might think of it as a diet that's very high in meat and dairy products. Um, and but actually, the ketogenic diet was originally created in 1921, more than 100 years ago, to stabilize brain chemistry in children with severe seizures. And this was long before the availability of useful seizure medications. So these were children who were having multiple seizures per day in many cases. And so the ketogenic diet was designed back then, created back then, a very strict version of the ketogenic diet um, to get as close as possible to fasting without starving children to death. Because for millennia, people had noticed that those with epilepsy would often improve if they were fasting. But you can't fast forever. So how do you get close to fasting? This is the original fasting mimicking diet. How do you get as close to fasting as you can while still providing some nutrition? So that was the original goal of the ketogenic diet, and it was very successful for seizures. More than 50% of children had more than a 50%, and adults as well, it's since been shown, more than 50% response rate in children and adults, and 10 to 20% completely free of seizures following a ketogenic diet.
How's it acting on the brain? What's it doing to the brain?
The ketogenic diet does many, many things. It's like a multi-purpose tool for brain health. So one thing it does, because we talked about how some of the root causes of mental illnesses, which are only relatively recently a focus of research, are inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance. The ketogenic diet reduces inflammation, it reduces oxidative stress, and it reduces insulin resistance. It also improves the balance of chemicals in the brain. So a lot of people think of um, uh, mental illnesses as problems with chemical imbalances in the brain. And these are the chemicals that they're talking about. You might have heard of serotonin or dopamine or norepinephrine. There are others, glutamate, GABA. Many different chemicals in the brain are associated with, or in some cases, even very much causing mental health symptoms. But the question is, what's causing those chemical imbalances in the first place? And uh, one of the things that's causing those chemical imbalances is that inflammation and oxidative stress. But another thing is that the brain is, if you're feeding it the wrong way, it will not be able to, in many cases, produce energy reliably. And if it can't produce energy reliably, all kinds of things will go wrong, and in quite spectacular fashion. What actually goes wrong is going to depend on who you are. And that's where our individual differences come in. So if you and I eat exactly the same bad diet, depending on what runs in your family and how you've lived your life to this point, you might develop Alzheimer's disease, you might develop bipolar disorder, you might develop type 2 diabetes, you might develop fatty liver disease. I might develop completely different conditions. I might develop cardiovascular disease. I might develop depression. I might develop ADHD. And that's where the individual differences are. But all of these conditions are just metabolic malfunction, really, at the heart of it. That's what's going on. If cells aren't functioning properly, you will develop a disease, physical and mental diseases. And which ones you get, it's really kind of luck of the draw. But you have tremendous control over what you are at risk for if you understand how to help your cells operate at their personal best.
Can you tell me about what you learned in this study and what this study concluded?
Yes. So this was the work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Denat. He's a psychiatrist who's been practicing in Toulouse, France for more than 35 years. So after witnessing a young family member, someone in his extended family with autism and seizures improve within weeks of adopting a ketogenic diet, he thought, well, I wonder if this diet could help my patients, especially my patients who are not responding to anything else that I have tried to help them. Psychotherapy, medications, hospitalization. And so he invited 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients with bipolar disorder, major depression, or schizophrenia to come into the hospital and voluntarily try a very mildly ketogenic whole foods diet in the hospital under his supervision to see whether or not they would respond. And these were folks who, these are all adults. These were people who had been ill for an average of 10 years, some for as long as 30 years. These were people who were taking, when they came into the hospital at the beginning of the study, an average of 5 psychiatric medications, not at all unusual for people with chronic mental illness. And all of them had one or more markers of poor metabolic health, obesity, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, things like that. So these were people with poor metabolic health and poor mental health. And they eagerly came into the hospital to try this intervention because nothing else had helped them. And what was remarkable about what he observed was that of the 31 people, 28 were able to stay on the ketogenic diet for more than 2 weeks, which is what you need to do to start to see benefit. Every single one of them improved, to the point that 43% of them achieved clinical remission from their primary psychiatric treatment-resistant chronic mental illness. And 64% of them left the hospital on less psychiatric medication. And all of them improved metabolically as well. And you do not see results like this in conventional psychiatric care.
So there's a few things that spring to mind when you talk about the study. The first is that they were inside a hospital.
Yes.
So I guess that's a confounding factor potentially.
Oh, yeah. Well, a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
So a blessing is that the diet was very carefully supervised. 6 days out of 7, they were allowed to go home on Sundays.
Okay.
And which still, I'm just mentioning, but they had a tremendous amount of support and supervision.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really helpful when you're switching from a standard high carbohydrate diet to a low carbohydrate diet. They also had very careful medical and psychiatric supervision, which is also really important because when you change to a ketogenic diet, brain chemistry fundamentally changes in ways that can, at first, when you're transitioning from one operating mode to another operating mode, it's stressful, and sometimes you can feel worse before you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And medications can be affected. So medications need to be monitored. And everything changes. These are all really healthy changes. Your blood sugar can drop. Your blood pressure can drop, especially if you're taking blood sugar lowering medications or blood pressure lowering medications. If you switch to a ketogenic diet, it's so effective at lowering blood sugar. Many physicians who prescribe blood sugar lowering medications for diabetes need to cut the diabetes medication in half on day 1 in order to prevent dangerously low blood sugar. Because you've got a medication that's lowering blood sugar, now you've added a diet that lowers blood sugar, and this could be potentially dangerous. The diet on its own is not dangerous. It's the diet in combination with medications.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.